Welcome everyone. I hope that everyone is doing well. Delighted to welcome you here to this latest City Mental Health Alliance event. My name is Farima Derbyshire from the CMHA. And for those of you new to the CMHA, we're an alliance of businesses in the UK and internationally with a shared mission that every workplace should protect, support and create positive mental health for their people. And in doing so, we recognise that businesses can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to workplace mental health. Different people and different groups need different types of support and access mental health support in different ways. And the CMHA's Inside Stories series of events is rooted in personal stories and personal experience, and it's supported by experts. And it's one way in which we try to help increase our understanding of how businesses can support the mental health of everyone in their business. At previous events, we've heard about how action that businesses can take to support the mental health of people who are Black or from minority ethnic background. Also, another event, we talk about how people can support people who are LGBTQ+ and what we need to be thinking about there. And today we're looking at how we can best support the mental health and well-being of employees who are neurodiverse. I'm very excited to start this conversation. I just want to introduce you to some of the people who will be leading it. We're really grateful to Jim Taylor, who is now an independent consultant with 35 years of experience in working with people with autism. And thank you for being our chair today, Jim. And on our panel, we are really delighted to be joined by Professor Amanda Kirby, who's former chair in developmental disorders at the University of South Wales and currently CEO of Do It Solutions, and Lee Corless, Vice President and Head of the Autism at Work programme for the EMEA and APAC region at JP Morgan Chase, and Pak Cho, a manager from the Digital Audit Business Unit at PwC. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. There will be an opportunity to ask questions towards the end of the session. Please use the Q&A session or function to type them in. But without further ado, thank you, Jim, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Farima. Welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I know that my role today is to be the least popular person on the panel, because my role is to keep people to time, and the difficulty with that is that I usually get lost in what people are talking about and forget the time. But I do have a timer over here and I'm going to be changing that. What I would say is that I became very excited at the prospect of doing this, simply because of the concept of inside stories, because with a lot of the work that I've done around in the workplace and so on, and looking at neurodiversity and neurodivergence and so on, the bit that appears to be missing, in my view, there are two bits that appear to be missing. But the most important bit for me, and the bit that the reason why I became so excited, was listening to voices and listening to people's own story and giving that, because in my view, if there's something that's missing, it's an ongoing conversation. I'm sure that very few people will be looking upon this as some sort of box ticking exercise, but it is difficult when you try to capture something like this subject without actually taking on board the whole thing about speaking to people and hearing personal stories, and challenging individuals and individuals challenging workplaces and so on. So I think it's really important we get a very short period of time to deal with that. The second issue for me has been, and let's face it, this is all about me for a second. The second issue that I've had to face is that there continues to be, in my view, no shared and agreed understanding of what we're talking about. I was doing an exercise with an organisation recently and realised that the college I was working with and the employment places I was working with all had a very, very different idea of what neurodiversity was. And even when there was an accurate or a fairly accurate understanding of what we were talking about, it wasn't necessarily shared by everyone. It wasn't necessarily understood by everyone, and by everyone I mean individuals as well as organisations. So in the short period of time we have today, we can maybe address both of those things. The format of today will be that we will hear from our three panellists. We will look at certain things we have to rethink and discuss, and from 1:30 there will be an opportunity for me to direct some questions to the panellists, and then later on for us to get questions from delegates and so on. So please put those questions in. We'll try and get through as many of them as possible. So that's enough from me. When I was doing that exercise in neurodiversity and creating a course for a college, the name I kept coming up against was Amanda Kirby. So I'm delighted to finally meet Amanda and give the opportunity. Farima has introduced Amanda, so I'll hand over straight to you, Amanda.
Thank you.
And we'll listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, let me just share my screen, 2 seconds. And first thing is to say thank you very much for inviting me today. I've got an impossible task to cover the whole of neurodiversity in 10 minutes, but I'm going to give it a really good go. What I wanted to just explain who I am a little bit. I'm a bit of an oddball. I come from a neurodivergent family. I'm a medic. I worked in health and education, and I'm a doctor, medical doctor. And I worked in this field of neurodiversity for the last 25 to 30 years because I come from a neurodivergent family, and 25, 30 years ago, I needed to understand for my children, now my grandchildren, and I reflect back on my own family, myself. I realized that I'm neurodiverse myself. I was looking at my school reports yesterday from 4 to 18, and I had a spiky profile. I had really keen and lively, but a bit disorganized. Could be more accurate, but very keen. So there's all this sort of things going on. So I'm a CEO of a tech for good company and worked in this field a lot. And I'm just about to publish a book in the next couple of weeks, all about neurodiversity at work, talking about some of the stuff we're talking about today. Really important, as Jim said, is to listen to people's voices, to hear what true experiences are. So what I want to do in the next few minutes is to give you an overview. This is about me. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. We've got lots of things in our family. My children, my grandchildren are neurodivergent. So in your organization, you're going to have people, you're going to come in contact with people all the time. And who are those people? Well, I want to explain what Jim said, a little bit about what is neurodiversity, because that's an interesting framing that people are using it. I'm really pleased because it says, not about what it is, but who you are. And I think that's really important to start that discussion. So if we go back to the late 1990s, Judy Singer was a sociologist from Australia. She was doing her master's in sociology and was thinking about biodiversity. She comes from a family of a parent who's autistic, a daughter who's autistic, and she's on the autistic spectrum herself. And I think what she was thinking about, and in discussions with her, she's a good colleague and friend, really thinking about if animals and birds are diverse, and we've got a chameleon who's adapted to fit into a certain part, or a hummingbird being able to do a specific task, why wouldn't we as human beings be neurodiverse in ourselves? The thing is, the hummingbird can't do what the chameleon does, and the chameleon can't do what the hummingbird does. And that's going to be at the heart of what we're talking about today. So what is neurodiversity? Let's just think about it rationally. Our brains, naturally vary from person to person and are diverse and are part of human variation. And I think this is the important bit. We all think, move, act, and but actually society has an expectation that we do things in a similar way. That's about efficiency. That's not actually about who we are. And there's two different things there. So we are all neurodiverse. We've got 86 billion brain cells, all connecting in millions of ways. We often catalogue people in a specific way because it's easier to explain, this is my strengths, this is my challenges. The same number of brain cells are the stars in the Milky Way. I want to just think about that. That's huge in terms of the variability. So what does that mean? In your workplaces, you've got exec team, C-suite, customers, clients, colleagues, your supply chain, you're recruiting potential talent, perhaps the people you don't know that are not coming through the door because you don't know who doesn't come through. And you may well also have children who are neurodivergent. That means veering away from that average. Now, I think it's an interesting thing. So we're talking about 20%. And we're talking about a normal curve, but I don't know what normal and average is. I've never met a person who's average. That's the thing. So our society is set up for the average, but we have expectations. We use terms and words like neurodivergence, and sometimes that's seen as a negative connotation, but we can diverge with our strengths, and that so you can be an actuary, but somebody else may be acalculic. You can have somebody who is hyperacusis, amazing hearing, or no hearing. Anosmia, can't smell, or can really smell well. Now, if we take our divergent strengths, those are the sort of jobs you're going to be doing, characterizing your strengths, but none of us comes with a full package. I think that that's really important. We're all sort of suboptimal, I think, probably. Nobody's good at everything. So you can have a premier footballer that might have difficulties with spelling, and you've got an actuary who may not be able to kick a football. So actually, neurodivergence isn't a group of people. We can all have spiky profiles, but some of us have spikier profiles than others. And in my family, I'm neurotypical because we have a really neurodivergent family with all sorts of spiky profiles. So neurodiversity isn't a brain which says this is the autistic part and this is the ADHD part and this is the dyslexic part. It'd be great if it was, but it's not. And in actual fact, when we start thinking about neurodiversity, we think about developmental conditions like that we associate with this, like dyslexia, autism, dyscalculia, but also acquired conditions. We can have Parkinson's and dyslexia. It's not, we can't just say this is our brain and we only have these nice, neat things. It's not as simple as that. I think it's important to just capture that not everyone comes with a diagnosis or label. So when people come through your door to your workplace, not everybody's going to say to you, I have dyslexia or I am autistic. Some people don't know, some people have never been diagnosed, and certainly we see that females, particularly, only in the last few years, we've recognised that females have been missed with ADHD and with autism. I've just published a piece of work on dyspraxia, first work on females with dyspraxia ever published. Incredible, isn't it? They were only just starting to know this now. So we're seeing that females we were looking through a male lens of what it looked like, and we really had sort of stereotypical views. And actually females often can camouflage, and these are generalities, of course, but females can often camouflage in social situations, in workplace situations, but it has a toll on your mental health. Some people, females can have less likely to have the hyperactivity of ADHD. I have got ADD traits, absolutely, but I wouldn't have been disruptive and very fidgety. I would have been internally restless in school, not identified, but we've got lots of ADHD in my family. The other thing is if you have the wrong colour balls in your bucket, then you may not be identified because there's a 5-year waiting list or no services. So if your blue balls are the dyslexia ones, you're more likely to have gained a diagnosis in school and in college and university. However, if you have something like a receptive language challenge, you wouldn't have been picked up necessarily. So it depends on your pattern of strengths and challenges, what's in your cognitive profile. Okay, that's really important. Now, if I had longer, I would be going through this in more details, but it's a really busy picture, but it's an important one because our brains don't go, I'm only dyslexic, or I've only got autism spectrum disorder or condition. I've only got this, but I wanted to put this up because it makes a point. That till relatively recently, all our framing was quite negative. You had to be bad enough to get a diagnosis. And a lot of the words were dis, meaning difficulty, disorder, and it was quite a negative framing. Now, when we're talking about something like dyslexia, often we're talking about a difficulty with reading. If anybody did Latin out there, that's useful. You can deconstruct the words, it's not a problem. We clustered that, and that might be somebody taking longer to read information when they're reading a document. It might be not knowing where the punctuation goes or having difficulties with emails. With somebody who's got a sensory preference. Some people have sensory preferences who prefer certain contexts, wouldn't be uncomfortable, whether it's light, sound, texture, touch, a number of different things. Well, each one of us will have different traits and characteristics. The reality is all these things overlap. As I said, your brain doesn't get unpicked and unwired. A lot of conditions co-occur, okay? So this is a picture, and that's why you've got all those things running, and each person is going to have an individual profile. Till relatively recently, it was a negative framing, but we're starting to flip the narrative. And if you're in the workplace, don't you want to have somebody who's energetic and enthusiastic, sees linkages, works under pressure, hyper-focused, compassionate? And when we start that framing, then it's a positive dialogue when we're talking about not a shameful one. And this was just from Twitter, a couple of days ago, asking people with dyspraxia and DCD to tell me their strengths rather than their challenges. And that just tells you about that framing you can get. Hundreds of people responded. Isn't that great? That's a positive framing that we can talk about. So everybody has a spiky profiler. This is what I do. This is our neurodiversity profiler, produces those pictures, those different pictures. Very few people are just anything. It all overlaps, okay? That's your reality of those brain cells connecting. And neurodiversity is all about people and not labels. Two people with the same diagnosis will be very different people. And our brains don't switch off and on and say, I'm just talking neurodiversity, I'm not talking about anxiety today. I'm only going to talk about mental health and I'm not going to talk about neurodiversity. Often people actually feel when they're in the workplace, experiences personally, professionally, I've heard it, I've felt it myself, is they're worried about talking about some of those things. Now, people are coming forward. We've got Elon Musk talking now about that he's on the autistic spectrum. We're getting people coming forward and having those positive dialogues, but you can't spot who people are necessarily. You're not going to be able to tag who is and who isn't. But what we know is there's still, this is from the Institute of Leadership and Management last year, really showing there's still a lack of understanding and maybe a fear about what you do and put in place. So finally, what are the challenges people have in the workplace? Well, everywhere in the whole maturity cycle, employment cycle. And they have challenges at all of these different areas, applying, interviews and onboarding. And the things that they feel uncomfortable about where there are stereotypes, where there's difficulty disclosing, poor past experiences, anxiety, and it is about dialogue sometimes rather than a monologue. So what stops those conversations from happening? Feeling othered, a fear of less opportunity, wondering what's going to happen when you do reveal, and it can affect your mental health. And what happens is that some people compensate and camouflage. So my challenge to you, and maybe for discussions, is what do you want in your workplace? An echo chamber of the same people in your team, or a neurodiverse ecosystem with a really diverse group of individuals with different strengths and talents that can be optimized. And I'm open for questions when we move on to questions, and I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Am I unmuted? Yeah. Thank you very much, Amanda. That was quite incredible for 8 minutes. I see people asking for copies of slides, and we can deal with that at some later point. Thank you very, very much for that. That was really, really useful. Can we go on to very quickly onto the personal stories? And I'd like to introduce you to Pat Cho, who's a manager in PwC's digital audit business unit. And I'll give you as many seconds as you possibly can take, Pat.
Hi, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So hi everyone, my name is Pat, I'm a manager in PwC, working in our data analytics practice. So I have Tourette's, and without using any fancy medical terms, I have tics basically. And as with many neuro conditions, we are often only aware of the extreme cases that we are shown on telly or the media. So for example, Amanda, you showed the kind of who would employ and who would not employ people with certain disorders, and I wonder how many people wouldn't employ people with Tourette's because they assume it's involuntary swearing, which then brings me to when I actually tell people I have Tourette's, they are often surprised because, well, I tell them I don't actually swear, at least involuntarily. Sunday night was a different story, but let's not talk about that one. But jokes aside, my tics are kind of just meaningless vocal noises and some minor physical twitches. Like blinking. But the focal tics is, I guess, the part that makes my neurodiversity very much visible. And I say visible because neuro conditions are typically hidden, aren't they? Like ADHD or dyslexia, for example. So a bit about me. For me, quiet places make me very anxious because I'm worried my tics will bother other people. In uni, I struggled because unlike school, where I had the same group of friends for 7 years, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had to constantly meet new people, and that meant constantly feeling as if I had to explain myself. And frankly, it made me quite anxious all the time and depressed. One memorable thing going to work now, like my career, I wish I had handled differently is, so in my years in PwC, I've changed teams a couple of times. And that meant having to move around where I sat around the office. Really casual, right? No big deal. But no, that is genuinely one of my biggest fears, actually. And it sounds a bit silly, but I kind of stayed where I was for a long time and transitioned very slowly. And the thought of moving actually made me really anxious because, as I said, I'd spend so much time just being paranoid about what everyone else thought around me and couldn't concentrate. And my own team actually mistakenly perceived this as, it doesn't seem like Pac wants to be part of the team. And that is actually something I could have entirely avoided had I been a bit braver, a bit more open, and just discussed this up front. So I guess I've been talking a lot about the negatives of being neurodiverse, but I think we should practice more talking about the positive characteristics that they bring out. And half the time or more, we don't even realize that's happening. So for example, because I'm constantly, you could say, paranoid about what everyone thinks about me, it's trained me to subconsciously be very empathetic and emotionally aware. At least I hope my team thinks so, otherwise it'll be very awkward. And I've gotten so used to sharing my experiences and just being open. People I work with, I found, actually really appreciate that and therefore feel comfortable in return to confide in me with any of their own issues. And to me, it almost feels like in order to create an open atmosphere around work, you yourself need to first be prepared to open up. And I guess on the more lighthearted side, other perks include, and not limited to, I don't need to think very hard when I have to do those cheesy icebreakers where you tell everyone a fun fact about yourself. And frankly, it kind of makes me unforgettable, so I don't have to introduce myself twice to anyone. Oppositely, if you are here because you know or work with someone with a particular condition, sometimes it's easy to assume that they don't want to talk about it, right? So you kind of keep your questions to yourself, or you go away and learn about it elsewhere. In fact, that's probably why most of you are here. But I would actually say being afraid to talk about it is already making it a bigger deal than it needs to be. Personally, I welcome questions. I can't speak for everyone, but I think it shows that you care and you're interested. And equally, some might not give you the reaction that you're hoping for, and that's okay because you're not going to get it right every time, just as with everything else in life. Generally, though, I think conversing creates normality, which, in my opinion, is the greatest gift you can literally give someone with a difference. For me, normalization is a cure, and I mean that literally, because when I'm completely focused on something else, or I'm completely comfortable with the people around me, my tics disappear. I forget to tic. I forget I have Tourette's completely. And for example, I'm a pianist. I also like to sing a bit, and I don't tic when I'm doing either of those things. Oppositely, if I am super stressed, my tics get worse. Or if I'm super anxious, it's like a window to my soul almost. Or you should call it a song because it's noises, isn't it? A very bad one. But I think as everyone else talks more and more, I think one thing you'll find is that one thing diverse people all have in common is a subconscious need to prove that they don't need special treatment, that they just want to show that they can do their job just like everyone else, as well as everyone else. I remember my mum used to raise me by saying, because you have Tourette's, you need to, do everything else better than you need to do things better than everyone else. You need to get better grades. You need to run faster, jump higher. You need to be thinner than everyone else. I mean, I kind of made the last one up, but she did call me fat for years, still does. But if you actually think about it, it's not dissimilar at all to what you hear if you listen to someone talk about race. How many times have you heard someone say, I've been told I need to do better because I'm Black or because I'm Chinese, whatever. And I even got into a habit of apologizing for having Tourette's to people when I introduce myself. And whilst I think society has improved tremendously, I think we all have a responsibility, neurodivergent or not, to squash that negative connotation that Amanda was talking about of being different. We are all different, so what? To close, I think 2 parts. My message to any neurodiverse individuals would be, 1, be proactive in explaining your personal needs, what might help you. I've found it way better than reactively explaining after something might have gone wrong. For example, thinking about my seating situation. And number 2, don't assume people will think negatively of you. Be open and give everyone the equal chance to form their own opinions about you. For me, I said my first year of uni kind of wasn't great. But I realize now it's purely because I assumed people would think I was weird. No one actually called me a freak, at least to my face. In fact, no one was even remotely bothered. And to anyone who is here as someone working with neurodiverse individuals, I guess number one, talk more. Because by talking, you might actually be helping someone realize maybe this is why I have certain behaviors or thought patterns that I've never been able to explain. They will know because that is their version of normal. And number two, don't prescribe. For example, don't go up to a dyslexic person being like, oh, don't worry, I'll avoid giving you tasks that involve lots of reading. But think about rephrasing your question to open ones like, is there anything you feel like I can help you with to help you adapt? And finally, I just think it's impossible to adapt your workplace to suit and fit every single neuro condition. But I think it's more important to train your people in being able to understand, raise awareness, and in being able to deal with these situations. For example, drawing on very recent personal experience, would you know what to do or how to react if a colleague told you they were diagnosed with ADHD yesterday? Thanks, that's all from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pat. That's a really powerful message. A lot of information in there, a lot of food for thought. A colleague of mine uses the phrase that conversation is the currency of change. And that had a huge impact on me, and I think it's something we need to continue to look at. I'm going to race on to, thanks, Pat. I'm going to race on to Lee. Lee, I'm more than happy to give you your 7 or 8 minutes if we go beyond past, and we can adjust the question time. So I'll hand over to Lee. Thank you.
I'll try and fit it in the time, no worries. And first of all, very much apologies, bad timing. My window cleaner has just turned up. So if you suddenly hear noise at my office window, he's just cleaning my windows. So my name is Lee Corless. I am the head of the Autism at Work program for JP Morgan throughout 2 regions, anything outside of the US effectively as it stands. But I'm not here really to talk about the program itself. I'm here to talk a lot more about myself and give you an idea of a good and a bad experience throughout my career. So I am diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, and I'm one of the most senior people within my organization who regularly will talk about that and raise awareness, etc. And it's some of the reason that I got into the work that I do now. But I have not always worked for JP Morgan. I have worked for other companies, ranging from the police force through to other banks, etc. The best organization or the best person I've ever worked for is myself. I ran my own businesses for 10 years, and I clearly was an exceptional boss. I then went into the financial industry after a short period of working in law enforcement, which I have to say didn't greatly enjoy. However, I found my way into the finance industry. Now, I didn't get my diagnosis until later in life. I was 35, and that was a difficult journey. And the reason I went after my diagnosis is going to be based a little bit on what I'm about to say, but equally because I had a son. I have 3 children, and my son was diagnosed very early on with autism due to him not developing in the correct way. Miraculously, 6 months later, according to the same doctor, he was cured. It's a miracle. And then 6 months later, he was re-diagnosed when we took him to one of the leading professionals in the UK, who clearly stated a number of conditions that put him along the spectrum. And when that sort of happened, and my current wife started to talk to me and said, "Does that not resonate with you at all? Is that not you? Those kind of traits that you're seeing, do you not see that in yourself?" And to be honest, when you look back on your life, you kind of start to realize just how you lived your life and how perhaps you were different to other people and treated differently. I was bullied terribly at school because I didn't like other people's company. I much prefer to be studying and be indoors than out. But yet again, to fit in, what did I do? I took up playing in the sports teams. I didn't want to be. It was too overwhelming for me. So I would choose the position where I could be leastly affected. So I was a goalkeeper at football because I was on my own. I love playing golf. I was playing on my going and hitting a golf ball for hours on a field all on my own. And then I moved into the workplace and I moved into corporate life. And knowing that the way that I was, and the way that I was always direct, I was always blunt. People always called me that. They always called me miserable, because my face never changes. You know, I never look interested. I never gave eye contact to people. I wouldn't do all the normal things that you are trained to say that is somebody who's engaging with you in a conversation. Why I have to look in your direction, why I need to take notes, why all of this needs to be as evidence to somebody that I'm listening to them, when actually I can be staring out the window, I can be slouched in my chair, but you know what, I am extremely comfortable and I have an eidetic memory, so I can actually tell you word for word everything that you have just said to me. I don't need to make notes. So again, people sort of putting pressure, and I had to conform, and this led to real tough challenges in the workplace with the previous company, when year on year my performance was, yes, he does great, but his behaviors are not what we see as normal, what we expect from an individual. And I was always given lots of feedback around how I could change things, what I needed to do. And do you know what? I worked so hard at changing that, and I thought I'd put so much effort into becoming a better individual. Then you go and have your end of year and they tell you the same things, and you think, hang on, I've been working so hard at that. And it came to a head when one particular manager actually then decided he would start to give my mannerisms a name, and he called them Leisms. And started to talk about that throughout the organization. Yes, I have an employee, he has Leisms. And that started to become a little bit of a phrase throughout my sort of business area, that when people look disinterested or what, etc., it became a Leism. And that led to an awful lot of anxiety for me, an awful lot of stress, to the point that I ended up suffering quite badly, and I had quite a few months out of work, and had to take time off. I unfortunately had to take that to a tribunal, etc. All a bad experience, all the wrong things that the company were doing. The company were standing by the manager, even though they'd heard this phrase of Leisms. They were standing by their manager because their manager was in the senior position and therefore should be in the right. And that wasn't right. That was creating an awful atmosphere, and other people in my team who had any other conditions would speak to me and say, hey, I'm never saying a word, I'm staying hidden, I'm not going to come forward. This is not a culture that I want to be involved in. And then I moved companies. I was approached for a job at JP Morgan, and I took that. And I'd had my diagnosis, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to be open from the beginning. I don't want to walk into an environment like that again. So at my very first interview, I declared my autism to my line manager, my incoming manager. And he said, how can I accommodate this interview better? And that made me stop. That's the first time I've probably stopped dead in my tracks and thought, I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for somebody to ask me what he could do to make the interview process a little bit better for me. We went through the interview. He said, absolutely everything you're telling me is everything that I'm looking for in an individual. And by that point, all we'd spoken about is my condition, how it affects me, how it affects my work. We hadn't actually got into what he wanted me to do in the job. And he was already telling me that stuff I was telling him that natural to me is everything he's looking for. So I started at JP Morgan, and I still walk into an environment that, whilst it was building and improving, I still walk into the same thing. You don't look autistic. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to look like. It's the face I was born with. It's a little bit miserable. It's a little bit ugly, but hey, it's all I've got. So I'm going to look this way no matter what. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to look or how I'm supposed to be autistic. I do a lot of talks now, and I can gauge my audience age by two things, or two programs, because it's television seems to dictate what people's perceptions of autistic people are. And that is, if I turn around and say, hey, who remembers the character Dustin Hoffman in Raveman, that Dustin Hoffman played in Raveman? If you get a lot of people saying, yep, I know I'm dealing with an older generation, and therefore I'm stereotyping a little bit, but what their perception of an autistic individual will be. if it's somebody like the Good Doctor, or if I think about Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory, whilst never spoken about, that character is somebody who has Asperger's syndrome. So again, if the people can relate to that, then I know it's a younger generation. Again, stereotyping, but television and movies have a big part to play in the perception of neurodiverse conditions. And, you know, good or bad, I really don't mind how it is, because it starts conversation, and that for me is important. But at JP Morgan, that still felt the need to mask, because that is inbuilt in me. So I was still pretending to be normal, if you like. I would make big memories to always look people in the eye in meetings. I even went on a handshaking course. Go figure, who knew that people could make money out of teaching you how to handshake correctly? But there's all these power handshakes you had to learn, all of those kind of things to fit in, to appear normal, because I wanted to get on in my career. But doing all of that, hiding my true self, takes a lot out of me. And December 2019, I suffered a heart attack. And a lot of that was put down to the anxieties that my autism can bring, and the extra stress, etc., that puts on me. But you know what? My employer was fantastic. They not only said, hey, we've got to get you back to health physically, they said, at your age, having that kind of you know, episode, we need to look after your mental health as well. And not only did they refer me and find me the correct counsellor, etc., to talk to, they went out of their way to find a counsellor who was an expert in counselling somebody on the spectrum. So it was resonated and was personal to me. And I quickly got myself back to health and was back into work, and I've been fully supported ever since. The culture that we have and that I'm able to support in creating with the Autism at Work program is second to none. I've never come across a company that is very forward thinking, that actually inclusivity of everybody in the workplace is paramount to them. The support that they give, the employee background support, the manager support, the training, absolutely everything that is given with that inclusivity in mind. And we've already covered and said you can't cover every condition, but hey, you know, we don't want to cover every condition, but we need to treat everybody as an individual. I will pause there, because I know I've gone a little over, and I could see Jim twitching in my screen. So it's his sign to say, shut up. I can go on for hours, because this is what I do. But Jim, back to you.
No, thank you very much, Lee. I'm glad you read the signs. I was twitching. And this has been the most difficult session I've ever done to actually stop people, because I lose myself in the story. That's quite incredible sharing from all of you. Thank you very, very much. I have a couple of questions before we open it up to delegates. Can I ask the three of you about your views on the need to disclosure and or the need for diagnosis? And I'm asking that question because in some of the workplaces I've had contact with, a number of employees do not wish to disclose. And when they have disclosed, in some instances, they've been told to go away and bring me back some form of evidence in the form of a diagnosis. So could I ask the three of you to chip in what your views might be on the issue of disclosure?
Can I start? Which is, I think the word disclosure is a problem. So
yeah.
I think that's the first thing. The disclosure says that you're hiding something, you've got to reveal something.
Yes.
And for some people, their previous experiences, I know, have been really negative. I've seen that with my own children, who, when they've gone in to apply for jobs, they've said, my son has ADHD, dyspraxia and dyslexia. We had a long discussion. Do you say all of it? Should you say some of it? Which bit should you reveal? When do you reveal? And people's responses are not always positive. So I think the problem being is that when people think is disclosure what's going to happen, and what's happened in the past, how's that made you feel? And I think some workplaces feel sort of like, why didn't you tell me? And it's almost feeling like you've hidden something that you should have done. But it's, you know, I think the other thing is workplaces don't need a diagnosis. To give workplace adjustments, you don't need a formal piece of paper. So that shouldn't happen. And there is also diagnosis by social bias. You're more likely to gain a diagnosis if you're a white middle-class male quite often, if you come from other social groups, you might have had less opportunity, and now there's long waiting lists all over the place. So we've got to challenge the expectations you're going to get a piece of paper, and also not necessary. It should be more about, how do I support you to be your best? And that's a very different one from a revealing and feeling shame to actually opening up the dialogue from the start.
My question, Amanda, came from a debate, an argument I had with an organisation who had written in a statement about disclosure, saying that if an employee had revealed at some later point, now I don't know if they used that word, but if they revealed at some later point that hadn't been disclosed during the interview, it was a problem. I think that's probably illegal. But I'm not a legal person, so I could show some dissent on that. Lee, you had made the statement about revealing or declaring, or whatever word you want to use, about your autism and Asperger's syndrome during your interview. Is that something that you would recommend?
It truly is, yeah. I mean, from the beginning, I want people to be honest and be true to themselves. And I spend a lot of time telling people this is about revealing your strengths. You know, it was particularly when we talk about autism, a lot of what people put on a job specification are things that come within that that are sort of natural to people like me and others that have that drive, that single sense of doing the right thing. And why are you not putting that on your resume? Why are you not talking about your strengths? So it's about talking up front about your strengths, being honest and true about yourself. So when you walk through the door, you are not having to mask, you're not putting that extra pressure on yourself. And quite frankly, if you are honest and truthful and that employer doesn't want to employ you based on that, you never wanted to work there anyway, because it is going to be an extremely difficult ride for you. So one thing I'll always say is be honest up front, but do your due diligence on any employer. Your interview is not just them interviewing you, it's you interviewing them. It is somewhere you're going to spend a lot of your life, a lot of portion of your life. So be honest from the start. It makes working a lot easier.
Thank you, Lee. Pac, do you have a comment on that?
I guess I can only draw on my personal thoughts. I mean, mine's a bit different because I'll go through maybe 1 minute before they figure it out anyway. But I think, you know, if you asked me that question 7 years ago, I might have been like, no, I want to just get through my normal application as a normal person, get through to the interview, and then maybe like I'll tell them I have Tourette's, but by that point I would have hopefully made different impressions. You know how you people talk about how you make an impression within 10 seconds meeting someone, and I guess I'd try my best to stray that away from having Tourette's, for example. But I think now, if I was to apply elsewhere, my honest opinion is I would do it, but I wouldn't be sure if it is the right thing to do. But I think I saw in one of the comments, which is rightly so, you know, if they reject you for just being who you are, it's not going to work out anyway.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Can I ask all of the panel then, what very briefly, what you think that workplaces can do better to support positive mental health? How do you promote an inclusive culture? I think the culture thing interests me. I spend a lot of time working in schools where the focus is on barriers and problems and overcoming challenges. And you know, we're talking about workplaces maybe having a different culture, but that's who people are going into for that. So just very briefly, for the three of you, what can be done in workplaces to improve on that?
Shall I start?
Yes, please, Amanda.
I think we've got to start, the culture has to start at the top of the organisation. You have to have a buy-in from C-suite, from your executive team to say this is valuable, and you have to portray your values throughout your business, and you've got to model them. You know, otherwise it becomes, this is what we're doing this year and this is what we're doing next year, and it doesn't become business as usual. You've got to create psychologically safe spaces where people can have conversations, which might be a bit uncomfortable sometimes because you're uncertain about getting it right. And it's having those conversations to say, we can get this right, and ensuring that people have adequate training and awareness so they do have conversations, that they can have better dialogue. And that also means in the organisations really ensuring that you have your processes from all the way to your job descriptions all the way through. You're really thinking about how to have inclusive processes that are equitable, not equal, because that's doing the same thing for all, but doing the right thing for each person. Yeah. And that takes, you've got to get buy-in at the top for that to happen.
Yeah, I would just pass a comment on that, because I think you are right. I believe that, you know, starting from the top, and sometimes the question I ask is rather cynically, how do we convince the accountants? Now that sounds very, very cynical, but I know if I can throw the question onto you, Lee, that James from the US talks about employing neurodiversity people as being the talent pool. And I think that whole thing, I don't necessarily want this to be an advert for JP Morgan, but they have that positivity that we are gaining from this. This is not some charitable thing we do. We are gaining from this.
Absolutely. I mean, the program itself. So if I just quickly add on, the other things that we need to do there is, as leaders, listen. You know, listen to what our employees are saying, and actively and positively take action and be seen to be taking action. In that way, you're creating a better culture, because, you know, people are then going to speak more and more. But back to the point, yeah, how do you convince the accountants? The people convince the accountants. You've seen the output of ours. We are showing productivity of 45 to 145% more productive in roles. We're talking about the retention rate within our the autistic community is up there in the high 90%. All of those things that talk to corporate pocket are all strengths as well, and we don't try and just sell it on the corporate pocket, and we are not a charitable in any way that we do, but it's making managers, whether that be C-suite right the way down through to individual line managers, team leaders, the strengths that individuals bring, the strength of managing everybody as an individual, and understanding how to get the best out of every individual. That's what we promote, and that's what, when you start to see the results. Nobody on the spectrum is any harder to manage than somebody who isn't. Same as anybody with a neurodiverse condition isn't any harder to manage than different. We just give the training to say, if you see this behavior, have you ever thought about doing this? And if you do that, training and listening to people, you will get the best out of everyone, not just neurodiverse, but it will make me feel, as a neurodiverse person, a lot more that I'm accepted in the workplace.
Yeah. Pat, do you have anything to contribute to that?
Yeah, sure. I think, as with things like well-being, etc., I think, because I get involved in that quite a lot with PwC, one of the main pieces of feedback is always, it'd be nice, it's more important to do things continuously rather than in the important dates. I think one thing that comes to mind is, I remember when I first joined, someone giving a motivational speech, is one thing they said is more noticeable when you deliver the tiny noticeable things. Like, for example, remembering someone's birthday, you're expected to do that. Whereas if you happen to remember someone's favorite color that they mentioned like in a passing conversation 2 weeks ago, they are more likely to be impressed. So I think, you know, whilst it's important to do the whole, maybe it could be training courses or some sort of, I don't know, open room conversation in the big dates like, I don't know, National Mental Health Awareness Week. I think there's probably a lot to do around how does your business or company or your team just continuously make the environment a comfortable place to talk about. I think it just surprises me how many people don't even realize they are neurodiverse until well into their career. And I guess that is because, well, they've never had the chance to talk about it. Like, what goes on in their head is their version of normal. So unless they know, oh, actually someone else has gone through the same thing, maybe that's the reason why I think differently to other people.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just one final question from me. Can I ask each of the three of you to give me one thing that you want to tell employers as their take-home message today, the one thing that they need to remember months from now? Amanda?
One, we're all neurodiverse, and we've all unmuted just in time. We are all neurodiverse, but it is about being able to have open conversations and shared conversations. And I think it is about respect. And this is about neurodiversity, but it is about people, and each person's background experiences will be affected by the processes and practices you put in place. And at this time, I think we've learned, more than anything, we've learned that actually making adjustments to the way you work, where you work, and how you work helps all of us. And so that is a conversation we can have with each one of us. And listen, be respectful, and listen. We've had experiences of adjustments. We've had experience of adjustments, you know, through COVID-19. Think about that and what you've felt like during that time.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. Those two words are incredible words, respect and listen. And they're cliches, because none of us say we don't respect, none of us say we're not good listeners, but it's maybe something that I'm trying to focus on the minute. What exactly does the word respect mean and listening mean? And that's something that we need to do very, very carefully across the board.
Can I just follow with that, which is, we often think what we've spoken that people have heard, but you only know that you are listening when you check for understanding.
Yes, absolutely. And recently I read a comment that most people, when they listen, they're listening to make a response rather than listening to understand, which is very glib, but it stopped me in my tracks. Lee, one thing to take away for everyone?
I think I've already said, which is treat everybody as an individual, and respect them as an individual. And the big one has always been, and listen to that individual, and act upon what you've heard. Don't just play lip service, but act upon it. That's the biggest thing that you can do. And the other thing is, reasonable accommodations do not cost a lot of money. So don't be thinking, oh, I'm going to have a whole workforce that's going to cost me a lot of money. It doesn't. You're already providing this equipment. Just make sure that the people who need it have got it.
Yeah, and more often than not, these reasonable accommodations or adaptations can have a positive impact on the whole workforce. Pack, one takeaway?
To be honest, I think just be proactive in initiating a conversation, whether you are, which side you're on, I guess, neurodiverse or the one working with someone. Yeah. Just don't assume, I guess. Yeah. Don't assume you'll be negatively judged.
That's a really important one. I think that's come up in some of the comments about being reactive, about creating a positive culture rather than, and I suppose I'm biased because I tend to get involved when things are not going well. Okay, we've got a short time that I'll take some questions, and there are a number of questions, and I'll just pick up one or two that have hit me at the moment. Lillian has asked, would you not say that this covers most of the human population, or do we have a benchmark for normal? Would anyone like to comment on that? Amanda? Well, by the way, you'll understood just now that I'm taking questions in turn, because that's the way we started and that's the way we'll finish.
Okay,
Amanda.
All right, okay. So we've all got spiky profiles, but some of us have got spikier profiles than others. Often that I often use a triangle of the person, the task, and the environment. And sometimes the challenges are the environment we go into that causes us challenges. So that neurodiverse is about us all, but we're expected to do things in a similar way. And in a workplace, it might be our interview process. We all have an interview that we have chat, face-to-face talk, and you have to have good communication skills, even if the job doesn't require it. So the fact is, though, it's not about, it's about each of us, but it's also in a workplace setting, think about the environment and the tasks we're asking people to do and make adjustments to fit each person. If we don't do that, then we're trying to fit people into a certain shape. And some of us are round shape, and some of us are diamond shapes, and some of us are square shapes. And I think that's what we're recognizing, we're different shapes. That's what we're all about.
I wonder if I can make a personal comment about that. I wonder, I don't know the answer to this question, but I wonder sometimes if our focus on difference can sometimes lead us perhaps to give the opportunity of talking about similarities. Because, for example, you mentioned, Amanda, lockdown and isolation that we've all been through. And from a personal point of view, a lot of the things that I was doing was very similar to some people with a diagnosis that I was working with. And I think sometimes, you know, we've already talked today about how labels and certain words can mean different things in different times. And I just wondered that I found it useful talking to children that difference sometimes means similarities, if you know what I mean.
We can feel similar impact on emotions when we're not, yes. We can feel anxiety, we can feel withdrawal, we can feel shame. We'll have experiences for different reasons. And during COVID-19, we felt lonely, isolated, and we've also used a range of adjustments during this time that would be useful. Some of them would be useful for some neurodivergent people, not others. Standing desks, working from home, wearing headphones, using Zoom. There's a lot of adaptations that we've learned, and we've had similar experiences. So I think it's sharing those. But as Lee said, really importantly, each person has a different, we've got to have that conversation because everybody's slightly different. Their work context, their task they do, the environment they're in will be different. So we can't assume, we can't say dyslexic people need beige paper and autistic people need headphones. I think we've got to just challenge some of those stereotypes.
Yeah, Amanda, just one quick question. Where have you been all my life? I think that last answer is just quite incredible, because I believe that we're in a situation now where people are looking for quick answers. You have a diagnosis of autism, you'll use visuals, you put headphones on, etc., etc. And this is why I feel that the absolute cliche of individuality stops us thinking it through. You know, not every, the most recent one was, you know, I have autism, I don't wear a mask. You know, for every autistic person that said that to me, I had 2 or 3 autistic people saying, I do not want to go out without my mask. So, and we need to be careful of that. Lee, I can't remember what the question was. The benchmark for normality. I don't know if you have a comment.
Comment is very simple. What is normal? Because there is very different interpretations of normal. So we spoke about interviews. Corporate normality is different to social normality, is different to home life normality, and then every household, every company, every social group will have their own interpretation of what's normal to them. So therefore, there is no benchmark for normal, in my opinion. Treat everybody as an individual. What makes that individual tick, and how do you get the best out of that individual? As a company is what you should be focusing on, not do I make eye contact? Do I shake your hand properly? Do I listen to you? Do I make notes? There is no right or wrong when it comes to normality. Again, individuality.
Thank you very much, Lee. I've just realised I've jumped out of my order that I said I would stick to. Pac, any very, very brief comments before we finish at 2 o'clock?
I mean, I wouldn't even tell you what normal is for Tourette's. I mean, there comes a point when it's like, this guy has tics or this guy has Tourette's, and I feel like society-wise, normal Tourette's is swearing, but actually that is probably quite far into the extreme. So I think there's probably a lesson there about actually teaching our people not to assume whatever's being shown on the media is the normal, is usually the extreme.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I would say that the drive forward is through events such as this. And I'm really sorry there's a lot of questions that we haven't got to, but hopefully it's caused a lot of people to think about things. Can I thank everyone for taking part? And can I thank the City Mental Health Alliance for putting this on? Lee, Pac and Amanda, I'm sure everyone else has been as intrigued and inspired by this as I have been. And thank you very much, everyone.